Hi, everybody. So, thank you for joining us once again for Workforce Readiness. Today, we're going to continue talking about creating resumes, and we're also going to dedicate some time to talking about how to create cover letters for your resumes. So, let's go ahead and kick this session off, and we will continue with this subject. First, let's talk about resumes. As we have already done work on our own resume here in this class, I wanted to just kind of reiterate that resumes are a marketing tool that showcases your qualifications for a particular job. It also shows an employer your experience and skills and knowledge in an easy to read format. And a resume can help answer many of the questions for an employer, including why should I hire this person? And what can this applicant do for me? And also, what does this applicant have that no one else does? Okay, so when you're applying for a position, you want to make sure that your resume kind of brings forward all these qualities without much clutter, without cluttering the document itself. Okay, so you want it to be kind of streamlined, and you also want it to make sure that it brings the point across, and that it's short and sweet, and that it's not too much information for the person that's reviewing your resume. Okay, so let's go ahead. In developing a resume, these are some basic sections that you could include. So you can include contact information. So you want to make sure that your contact information is correct and that it's a good way for them to reach out to you. You also want to include a career summary, provide some information, a brief narrative about your career and who you are as a professional in that career. You also want to include a section that talks about skills and qualifications and also experience and finally education and training. Okay, so these are typically some of the basic resume sections that you should include in your resume. And these could be like headers, and these could be sections, and from within each section, you could provide additional clarification on what you did, what your skills and qualifications are, and what are some of the most important things that you accomplished in that field. Okay. For contact information, you want to include things like name, address, phone number, and email address. You want to make sure that everything is accurate, and you want to make sure that everything is professional as well. So you might want to, for phone number, you may want to include a voicemail message that is a simple message and something that is still a little neutral. So I know that there's some people out there that include voicemail messages that could include just like a joke or like some sort of prank or something like that, which is funny because all your friends may get a kick out of it. But when you're applying for a position, you want to just make sure that it's not going to draw you back. It's not going to hold you back when someone is reaching out to you and they get this voicemail message from you, from your voicemail machine. So just go ahead and just keep it neutral. And if you do have like a prank or a funny voicemail machine message, you may want to change it at least during the time when you are looking for a position. Also, with email addresses, you want to include a professional email address. So something that is generally like first name, last name. It could be a variation. It could be first initial, last initial. But sometimes with email addresses, especially when they're personal email addresses, you can imagine that there's some situations where a person may include like a nickname or something that is not as professional. And so you may want to just kind of dedicate some time to getting a professional or at least a neutral looking and sounding email address so that it doesn't hold you back when people are reaching out to you. Okay. So it's once again, it's fine for you to have your own personalized email address with your nickname and with a variety of items that you really like, and it's funny and it's dear to you. It's completely fine to do that, but at least when looking for a job, you may want to have like a professional or a neutral email address that that you could use to communicate with your future employers. Okay, straightforward information, you know. So some of the things to include, and this is some of the things that I previously just touched upon. So with voicemails, inappropriate versus appropriate voicemail greetings, you could make the call. Generally, for employers, you may want to have a voicemail greeting that is somewhat neutral. For email addresses, keep email simple and professional. Recommendations are to have a separate email for each job searching. Um, yeah, so sorry about that. So there's a recommendation to have a separate email for job searching. So for example, you may want to have johnsmith@gmail.com versus Candy Crush 2015 at gmail.com. Okay, so this kind of shows you an example of a neutral email address versus a personalized email address. So Candy Crush, it's completely fine if you love that game. We all enjoy playing that game, but when it comes to communication with your future employer, you may want to dial that back a little bit. It's always funny to see that. But yeah, keep that in mind. So let's think outside the box. So when you're thinking about your resume, you may have at times to think outside the box, especially in situations where you may not have as much experience, and you may have to think creatively of the type of skills and experiences that you have gained outside of a job environment. Okay, so generally, when thinking about this, there's this very helpful exercise where you could think about these concepts here that you see on the screen. So there's home, community, and also school. Okay, so we all have, to some extent, robust um, experiences with home, community, and school, right? Especially when you're going to school and you're gaining all this really good experience in these segments of life. Okay, so when you're thinking about the skills that you've gained so far, and when you're trying to find skills that you could demonstrate on your resume, you could think of these different areas of your life to see how they could add to your resume. So, for example, at home, you may have chores, you may have babysitting, you may have lawn mowing, music lessons, dance class, sports lessons, etc. So you could draw from those experiences to add to your resume if you feel that your resume is kind of lacking a certain skill or a certain experience. Okay, with community, you could include community items like volunteer work, religious activities, any internships that you've done, job shadowing, community events, etc. So with community events, community aspects, there's a really important part of developing yourself that comes from community. Okay, so just think of the situations where you volunteered for something. So perhaps like you volunteer to manage a group of people. So that shows some sort of managerial experience right there, and it helps you practice that skill and develop that skill. Or let's say religious activities, if you were part of a religious activity group where you organized maybe an annual event, or maybe you put together coordinated events or some sort of program at your church or at your place of worship, that's also a really good place where you could kind of draw out some of those skills that you've developed. So either leadership skills, communication skills, the ability to budget, things of that sort. Okay. Think of your internships as well. So when you're first starting off, internships are a good place to learn um, different skills, and you want to, whether you're paid or not, you want to kind of show on your resume those types of skills that you've gained from internships. And with internships, you naturally have time to shadow people and when they're doing their jobs. So anything that you learn from job shadowing is also really important. And obviously, if we move over to school, you have things such as coursework, bands, art classes, theater, languages, honor society, sports, etc. And so you could draw from those skills as well to fill in some of the gaps in your resume. Okay, so when thinking about creating your resume, it's not only the skills that you gain from being in a job, whether part-time or full-time, but it's also these skills as well. So for example, one skill that may cross over from home to school and also community would be maybe you volunteered at an event where you were the Spanish interpreter, or maybe you were an interpreter of some other language, and you noted that you were pretty proficient in communicating in that different language and helping others uh, by giving them direction in that different language. So that gives you the opportunity to include in your resume something like the ability to, or maybe you're bilingual in a different language. And so that makes you more marketable at the workplace. Okay, so think of this when you're putting together your resume, and it should help maybe fill in the gaps of your resume. So when writing your resume, you wanna keep these in mind. Okay, so there's resume errors to avoid, and generally when you're writing your resume, you want to make sure that you have these items, that you avoid these items. So for example, resume errors to avoid: poor spelling and grammar, overstating your experience, providing too much information, being too generic. So when you're thinking of putting together your resume, you want to make sure that you have the chance to proofread your work and make sure that it's free of spelling and grammar mistakes. Okay, so you want to make sure that you proofread it. If you have a friend, you may want to ask your friend to proofread it. And if you are in this class, you could have me proofread it and I can give you some feedback on that. But generally, spell checking and grammar, that's one of the most simplest things that you could do, and it's incredibly important because any little grammar mistake could reflect bad on you. Okay, so unfortunately, that when people are reviewing your resume, that may be the the truth of the matter is that they may look at your resume, and if they see too many grammar mistakes, they may kind of dock you because of that. So that's why it's important to polish that resume, to write that resume, have it be proofread by other people, and get it to a point where it's really, really polished. Okay, overstating your experience. You always When writing a resume, you always want to make sure that you share the true extent of your skills and your knowledge. And I know that in many different jobs, you're going to have the opportunity to complete these really awesome projects and have these really great achievements. But generally, you want to kind of show the truth of what your experiences are and try to stay away for overstating your experience. Okay, so that's a thin line to walk, you know. So because obviously, if you did a really good job at your work, at your past job, you want to state it, but um, when writing down your experiences, you want to also make sure you don't overstate your experience, okay? And providing too much information, generally, you want to keep that resume short and sweet. So keep it to one page. If you're spilling over to the second page, you may want to see how you could bring down that resume so that it's one page. Okay, that's incredibly important. You want to just make sure that you have a one-page resume and that it doesn't have too much information. And I know that at times people may get pretty creative with getting that one-page resume. So they may get a one-page resume. They may make the margins tiny. They may make the font tiny. so that they could fit more information in there, because people have this idea that more information is better. But generally with resumes, you want to stay sweet and to the point, and you want to make sure that you don't put too much information. So by that I just mean, um, choose your descriptions wisely, make sure you don't include too much information, and also make sure that your font is at minimum 10-point font, okay? If you're under 10-point font, that might be a little bit too small. You generally want to be within the ranges of 10-point to 12-point font, okay? And then finally, being too generic, you don't want to be too generic, but you just want to bring forward some of these key skills that you have, okay? So elements of a resume to include. So you want to include multiple formats. So it's okay that you have different formats for your resume. So you could have 3 formats, and then from there you could choose which one is the most appropriate for the job that you're applying. You want to include keywords. So if the job that you're applying for, you see these reoccurring key terms, use those keywords, and that's going to help show your recruiter that you have some of these same qualities and skills that they're looking for. On top of that, if your resume is being reviewed first by uh, a program that reviews many different resumes, that program is automatically going to try to find these key terms. And if you include those key terms in your resume, that'll help you get through that first step of an automated uh, resume review. Okay, so also you want to keep things clear, measurable, and so you want to keep your successes clear and measurable. So if possible, include numbers in there. So if you did 12 cases a year or something like that, or if there was some way that you could quantify your successes, that's perfect. So things like, I have 3 years of experience in this, or I have closed 30 cases in one day, or I have sold X amount of things during this period, or I have assisted X amount of people during my job. So keeping things clear and measurable helps really get down to the point of your resume. And finally, it's really important to include a cover letter, which is something that we haven't really talked about in this class as of yet. So cover letters are really important, and we're going to really talk about that next. Okay, so let's take a look at examples of resumes. So here, this is a good example of a resume. And of course, this is not the best, or may not be as perfect, because we are seeing this on a PowerPoint presentation. But here we have a brief example of what a good resume looks like. And so here on the very top, we have um, some contact information. We have resume profile, education, experience, relevant high school studies, honors and rewards, and things of that sort. And so as you can see, it keeps it short and sweet to the point. It quantifies some of the successes. So here with GPA, you have a 3.85, top 5% of the class, short and sweet to the point. Down here, we have a couple of experiences where it tells you um, the jobs that the person had. Okay, so it looks like we have some newspaper and yearbook committee staff opportunity experience here. And so this is an example of someone that came straight from high school. As if you're older and if you've had different experiences, you could format your resume in a very similar way. Okay. This is an example of a bad resume, and mainly because you see that there's a couple of different um, uh, typos here. So as you can see, these typos kind of show up and they're highlighted in red. In addition to that, it's not very well organized. And so to a person that is reviewing the resume for the very first time, it could be hard for them to get the gist of this resume. And so the organization of it could definitely be a little bit better. Okay, so that's the main difference between this resume and this resume is because number one, there's these grammatical mistakes with the bad resume example. And number two, the first resume example is a little bit better organized. And as a result, the recruiter has an easier time understanding the skills and qualifications of this candidate. Okay. And then I've also included some real hot stuff at gmail.com. So as you can see, this person should probably get a better email address to include in their resume. But these little formatting issues, they could draw you back, and obviously the organization of the document really draws it back. Okay, so as part of uh, applying for a job, they're going to ask you for resume. So that's a pretty simple thing that is anticipated nowadays, right? And so we're anticipating that they're going to ask for that resume. In addition to that, they may ask you for references. Okay, so with references, you want to have people who can talk about your work experience and work habits, character skills, and you want to have a good 4 or 5 people that could be your references. To some extent, you want to let them know ahead of time that they'll be included as reference, so that if they get called out of the blue, they won't be startled or surprised by it. Okay, so you want to have people who could talk about your work experience or work habits. So you could think of maybe classmates, teachers that have experience with you, maybe former managers, uh, former co-workers, things of that sort. So there's a couple of bullet points on your references. Always contact them so that they know that the employer may be contacting them. And do not list them on your resume, but you could add them to an application that the employer may have for you. And references should be on a separate page that includes contact information. So for your references, kind of iron them out and prepare them so that you prepare your references so that you have good contact information from them, and it could be a separate document. Okay, so for contact information, you're going to want to have their first and last name, their telephone number, their address or their work address where they could be contacted, a good email address, and also how you know this person. Okay, so is this person a former coworker? Is this person someone from school? Is this person someone from a community event that you volunteered at? Things of that sort. Just give them some context on how you know this person and how you how they've worked with you in the past. If they call that person, they may have just general questions about how do you know you? How do you know the person that's applying for this position? Whether you think that their personality this or that, or what are your general thoughts of this person? Okay, so have these references ready to go so that you could also submit them in a separate document. So far we have the resume, and then we also have another document, which is a reference document. Okay, so, and before we move forward with references, it's always a good idea to just kind of have a diversity of references. So don't include only close friends, but also include coworkers, include people that you've had a really good experience working with, and that and include people that they've kind of seen your skills in action and would be able to talk about those skills. Okay, so just a couple of tips on that. So let's talk about a cover letter. Okay, so a cover letter is essentially a document that is kind of like a letter that goes first in your application packet. Okay, so when you apply for a job, the first document is going to be a cover letter, and the cover letter is essentially kind of like a little letter that introduces you, gives a little bit more context about you, talks about your interests and why you're applying for the position. So it's a really nice detail to include when you're applying for a position. So it's a good idea to include a cover letter with your resume. Okay. So cover letters are a little different than resumes. So you don't have to reiterate the information that's going to be on the resume, but essentially you could break it down into these 4 parts that you see here. So you could talk about in the first paragraph, you could do an introduction on who you are and why you're submitting your resume to this company. For the second paragraph, you could talk about providing a summary of your skills and experiences listed in your resume and why you are the perfect match for the position. Okay, so you don't have to necessarily verbatim go over all of your skills because that's already in the resume, but you could just include a couple of the most important big ticket items and talk about why that makes you a good candidate. And then finally, with the third and fourth part, the third paragraph expresses your intentions with a company and your desire for an interview or a meeting. And it also expresses gratitude and how you're looking forward to meeting the team and the company and working with them in the future. Okay, so it just kind of closes up um, the, the letter. Finally, with closure, you have your signature and salutation. So this letter should be in a business letter format, and it kind of gives the employer the opportunity to see how well you could write a letter, how well you could put together a letter, and also this letter should be proofread. So you want to make sure that you get rid of any spelling or grammatical mistakes. So you want to make sure that this letter is also polished. Okay, um, so these are some general guidelines for cover letters. So keep it concise, usually 1 page. Ask a reliable source to read and edit your cover letter before you send it. Use bullet points if you can, itemizing your skills or job experiences. Keep the formatting simple. Use basic fonts. Generally, don't keep the font very small. Just include anywhere from 10-point to 12-point font. And don't forget to express your interest for the job and thank them for their time. If you are applying for many different jobs, you want to make sure that your cover letter is relevant to the job you're applying for. Okay, so it all has to be consistent. So I know that when you're job searching, you're going to be applying for many different jobs, and you want to you're going to write different cover letters. If possible, I'd like to recommend that you create a format, a generalized cover letter, and then you simply personalize it to the job you're applying for when you are applying for it. So that makes it a little bit easier. So you could just make a couple of different changes, proofread, and then attach it to that resume. Okay. This is an example of a good cover letter. So as you can see here on the very top, it has some contact information, much like a business letter. And then further on down here, you see that it starts off with a brief introductory paragraph. So it says, I'm responding to the employment opportunity listed on your website. Please accept this letter and the accompanying resume as evidence of my interest in applying for the writer position at Company Co. Okay, so very simple. To some extent, you could fill in the gaps and just kind of personalize it to the job you're applying for. Okay. Second paragraph goes on to say, I have experience in technical writing, editing, designing, layout, and desktop publishing, which makes me uniquely qualified for this position. I was also a write for my high school paper for 3 years covering events, sports, and academics. So as you can see, it kind of talks about some of the big ticket experiences out, outlined in the resume, but it doesn't go into deep detail because the resume already focuses on that. And then finally, it goes on to say, I would appreciate the opportunity to meet you and discuss how my skills would meet the needs of Company Co. Attached is my resume for your consideration. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to hearing you. Sincerely, Tom Jobseeker. Okay, so as you can see, fairly general, but still kind of covers some of your skills, and it serves as like an introduction, providing more context to your application. Okay, so that's all for this presentation today. Uh, thank you for participating in this lecture. I'll include this lecture in the module for this week, and there will be an assignment at the end of this module, so just go ahead and work on that assignment, and we'll see you next time. Thank you very much and have a great day.